My life was picture perfect. At least that's what everyone said. I had it all. A loving fiancé, a supportive family, and a bright future ahead of me. I was on top of the world, or so I thought. Little did I know a storm was brewing, ready to tear my perfect life apart. Ethan and I were inseparable. We spent our days exploring hidden cafes, our nights curled up on the couch watching movies, and our weekends planning our dream wedding. We were building a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of forever. He was my rock, my confidant, the one person in the world who truly understood me. At least, that's what I believed. Our families were overjoyed with our engagement, showering us with love and blessings. My parents adored Ethan, and his parents welcomed me with open arms. We were a match made in heaven, destined to live happily ever after. But there was one person who cast a shadow over our happiness: my uncle, Tom. Tom was my mother's older brother, a successful businessman with a silver tongue and a domineering personality. He had always been a constant presence in our lives, his opinions echoing loudly in our family. He had a way of making everyone around him feel small, insignificant. And for some reason, he seemed to disapprove of Ethan. At first, his disapproval was subtle, a raised eyebrow here, a snide comment there. But as our wedding date approached, his disapproval grew more pronounced. Tom had a daughter, Talia. Talia was my cousin, but we were as different as night and day. Where I was quiet and reserved, Talia was loud and attention-seeking. She was the epitome of a spoiled princess, used to getting her way, no matter the cost. And unfortunately for me, Talia had developed a rather intense infatuation with my fiancé. At first, I dismissed her flirtations as harmless. After all, she was my cousin, and Ethan was madly in love with me, or so I thought. As the wedding preparations went into full swing, Talia's behavior became increasingly inappropriate. Her flirtations with Ethan grew bolder, her eyes lingering on him a little too long, her laughter at his jokes a little too loud. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just Talia being Talia, but a seed of doubt had been planted in my mind. It was like a serpent's whisper, slithering into my thoughts, poisoning my happiness. And then there was my uncle, Tom. He seemed to encourage Talia's behavior, often throwing them together at family gatherings, praising Ethan's accomplishments while subtly undermining mine. He'd say things like, "Ethan, you're a real catch. Any girl would be lucky to have you." His words were like daggers to my heart. Ethan, to my dismay, didn't seem to discourage Talia's advances. He'd laugh at her jokes, engage in long conversations with her, even dance with her a little too closely at family parties. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Ethan loved me, and Talia was just being her usual attention-seeking self. But as time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan started becoming distant. He'd forget about wedding planning meetings. His phone would go straight to voicemail when I called. And he'd spend hours on end with my uncle and Talia, their excuses of family bonding ringing hollow in my ears. My perfect fiancé was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. One evening, my uncle called me, his tone uncharacteristically somber. He asked me to meet him at a cafe, saying he needed to talk to me about something important. My heart pounded in my chest, a sense of dread washing over me. When I arrived, he was already seated, a grave expression on his face. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He cut straight to the chase, his words hitting me like a ton of bricks. "Amelia," he said, his voice low and serious. "I've been watching you and Ethan, and I'm worried. I don't think he's the right man for you." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Talia deserves someone like him," he continued, his eyes fixed on mine. "Someone ambitious, successful, someone who can give her the life she deserves." Section 4. Shattered Trust. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. My own uncle suggested I step aside so his daughter could have my fiancé. "Uncle Tom," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "Are you suggesting that Ethan and I break up? Because Talia has a crush on him?" His words were a betrayal. I stormed out of the cafe, my heart shattered. The weeks that followed my uncle's shocking proposition were a blur of pain and confusion. Ethan and I had a series of fights, each one escalating the tension between us. He denied any wrongdoing, of course, accusing me of being jealous and paranoid. He claimed that Talia was just a friend and that my uncle was simply trying to be supportive. But his words rang hollow. The distance between us, once a mere crack, had become a chasm, swallowing up all the love and trust we had built. I was drowning in a sea of doubt and betrayal, desperately clinging to the wreckage of our shattered dreams. My family, once my sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. The air was thick with tension, every gathering a minefield of awkward silences and pointed glances. Section 2. Whispers and Shadows. My mother, torn between her brother and her daughter, tried to remain neutral, but her silence spoke volumes. She urged me to be understanding of Talia's feelings, to give Ethan some space. Her words felt like salt rubbed into my wounds. My aunts and uncles whispered behind my back, their sympathies clearly lying with Talia, the poor, heartbroken girl who had fallen for her cousin's fiancé. The whispers followed me everywhere I went, casting a shadow over my life. I felt like an outsider in my own family, judged and condemned for daring to question their twisted narrative. The pain of Ethan's betrayal was amplified by their lack of support, their willingness to believe the worst of me. I was alone in my grief, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Then, the inevitable happened. Ethan broke off the engagement. He did it in a crowded coffee shop, his words cold and calculated, his eyes avoiding mine. He mumbled something about us wanting different things, about me being too good for him. His excuses were pathetic, his lack of remorse even more so. I walked out of that coffee shop a changed woman. The world as I knew it had crumbled around me, leaving me standing amidst the ruins of my shattered dreams. The pain was unbearable, a suffocating weight crushing my chest. But somewhere beneath the grief, a flicker of anger ignited. Anger at Ethan for his cowardice, anger at my family for their betrayal, anger at myself for allowing them to dim my light. I threw myself into work, using my career as a shield against the pain. I deleted Ethan's number, blocked him on social media, and vowed to erase him from my memory. I started going out with friends again, rediscovering the joy in simple things. A good book, a sunny day, a shared laugh. I realized I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I ever gave myself credit for. There was a glimmer of hope in my heart, a whisper telling me I would love again. Life, as they say, has a funny way of working things out. Just when I thought my world had been irrevocably shattered, a twist of fate threw me a lifeline. My grandfather, a man I adored, passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was a pillar of strength and wisdom, the one person in the family who always saw me, truly saw me. He knew about Ethan, about the betrayal, about the family's role in it all. He never judged, never interfered, but his silence was a comfort. an unspoken understanding that I clung to. His death was a blow, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. But amidst the sorrow, there was a sense of peace, knowing that he was finally at rest. The reading of his will, however, turned out to be anything but peaceful. It was held at his lawyer's office, a sterile, somber setting that reflected the mood of the room. My family, dressed in their finest black attire, sat stiffly, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and anticipation. My mother sat beside me, her hand clutching mine, her touch offering a sliver of comfort. The lawyer, a stern-looking woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, cleared her throat and began to read. And that's when the bomb dropped. My grandfather, in his infinite wisdom, had left the majority of his estate to me. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and outright exclamations of disbelief filled the air. My aunts and uncles, their faces now contorted with shock and indignation, turned to stare at me as if I had personally orchestrated this injustice. My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with surprise, but I could detect a hint of satisfaction in their depths. My Uncle Tom, his face ashen, was the first to speak. "There must be some mistake," he sputtered, his voice laced with disbelief. "This is preposterous. My father would never have done such a thing." The lawyer, unfazed by his outburst, calmly adjusted her glasses and said, "Your father's wishes are clearly stated in his will, Mr. Miller. He was of sound mind and body when he signed it. There is no mistake." The weight of her words settled over the room like a thick fog. My grandfather, it turned out, had seen right through my family's charade. He knew of their betrayal, their willingness to throw me under the bus to appease my spoiled cousin and her manipulative father. And in his final act of love and protection, he had ensured that I would be taken care of, that I would have the resources to build a new life for myself, a life free from their toxic influence. Life took an ironic turn. While I was finding my footing, rebuilding my life piece by piece, Ethan and Talia's fairy tale romance began to crumble. It seemed karma had a plan of its own, a plan far more intricate and satisfying than anything I could have orchestrated. Word on the street, or rather, whispers from our social circle, painted a grim picture of their relationship. The initial excitement, the thrill of the forbidden, had worn off, revealing the cracks beneath the surface. Ethan, it turned out, wasn't quite the Prince Charming Talia had imagined. He had quit his job shortly after their whirlwind courtship began, claiming he wanted to explore new opportunities. Those opportunities, however, remained elusive, and Ethan quickly transitioned from a high-flying executive to a stay-at-home boyfriend, comfortably settling into a life funded by Talia and, by extension, my uncle. The whispers turned into hushed pronouncements, each more scandalous than the last. Ethan, it seemed, had a penchant for late nights and unexplained absences. He'd disappear for days on end, leaving Talia frantic with worry, only to reappear with a flimsy excuse and a charming smile that no longer held its potency. He was a master of manipulation, but even the most skilled con artist couldn't keep up the charade forever. My friends, loyal to a fault, kept me updated on the drama unfolding in Ethan and Talia's relationship. They'd share tidbits of information, their voices a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. Did you hear? Ethan was spotted at a casino in Atlantic City, and guess who he was with? Definitely not Talia. The final blow came when a mutual friend, unable to bear the weight of the secret any longer, confessed that Ethan had been seen with another woman, their intimacy undeniable. Talia, blinded by her infatuation and her father's constant reassurances, refused to believe it at first. But the evidence, much like Ethan's true character, was impossible to ignore. The realization hit Talia hard, shattering her illusions and leaving her heartbroken and financially drained. Ethan, true to form, had vanished, taking whatever he could carry and leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unpaid bills. It was then, amidst the wreckage of their ill-fated romance, that my Uncle Tom, humbled and desperate, reached out to me. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was pouring myself a glass of wine after a particularly long day. My Uncle Tom's voice, usually booming and confident, was uncharacteristically subdued, laced with a hint of desperation that made my skin crawl. He stammered through an awkward apology, his words stumbling over each other as he tried to explain how things had gotten out of hand, how he had been mistaken about Ethan. It was almost comical, hearing this proud, domineering man grovel, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before my very eyes. He spoke of Talia's heartbreak, of their financial woes now that Ethan had flown the coop, leaving them with nothing but a mountain of debt and a shattered sense of pride. And then, with an audacity that bordered on delusion, he suggested that I consider taking Ethan back. "He made a mistake, Amelia," my uncle pleaded, his voice thick with false remorse. "He was blinded by Talia's charms, but deep down, he knows you're the one for him. You can help him get back on his feet, guide him back to the right path. And besides," he added, his tone shifting from pleading to almost demanding, "it's only fair that you share your grandfather's inheritance. Families should take care of each other." I listened to his words, a mixture of anger and amusement bubbling inside me. It was almost laughable, the way they expected me to swoop in and clean up their mess, to play the role of the forgiving savior after they had so gleefully cast me aside. Did they truly believe that their betrayal could be so easily erased, that their actions had no consequences? "Uncle Tom," I said, my voice calm and steady, "my relationship with Ethan is over. What he does with his life is no longer my concern. As for the inheritance, that was my grandfather's final wish. I will not be made to feel guilty for accepting his generosity." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I hung up the phone, a sense of liberation washing over me. It was over. The charade, the manipulation, the endless cycle of guilt and obligation. It was finally over. I had broken free from their grasp, and I was never going back. Yes, there were consequences to my newfound freedom. My relationship with my family, already strained beyond repair, was now irrevocably broken. But in the ashes of that fractured family, I had found myself. I was no longer the naive, people-pleasing girl I once was. I was strong, independent, and capable of building a life on my own terms, a life filled with love, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing my worth. The silence that followed my conversation with Uncle Tom was deafening. It reverberated through the empty apartment, a stark contrast to the cacophony of accusations and demands that had just filled the air. The initial wave of anger subsided, leaving behind a strange sense of calm. It was the calm after the storm, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had finally stood my ground, drawn a line in the sand. The price of that peace was high. My family, or what remained of it, was fractured beyond repair. Their greed, their sense of entitlement, had poisoned the well of our relationships, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste that lingered long after the sweetness of their initial love had faded. But in the ashes of that loss, I discovered a love far more profound, far more enduring. It was the love of my grandfather, a love that transcended the boundaries of this world, a love that whispered to me through the years, guiding me, protecting me, even in his absence. His inheritance wasn't just about the money, although that certainly provided a level of security I had never known before. It was about the message it conveyed, the unspoken affirmation that I was worthy, that I deserved happiness, that I was not defined by the choices of others. He had seen the truth, the pain that simmered beneath the surface of my seemingly perfect life. And in his final act of love, he had given me the means to break free, to forge my own path. My life wasn't the fairy tale I had envisioned as a young girl. It was messier, more complicated, but ultimately far more rewarding. The pain of betrayal, the sting of rejection, had forged a strength within me that I never knew I possessed. I had learned that love wasn't about sacrificing your own happiness for the sake of others. It wasn't about settling for less than you deserved or allowing yourself to be treated as anything less than extraordinary. True love, I discovered, was about mutual respect, about supporting each other's dreams, about celebrating each other's victories and offering comfort during times of loss. It was about finding someone who saw your worth, who cherished your heart, who loved you not in spite of your flaws, but because of them. And as I stood on the precipice of a new chapter in my life, I realized that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a sense of hope, a belief that somewhere out there, amidst the twists and turns of life, my own happily ever after awaited. It might not look like the fairy tales I had grown up with, but it would be mine, built on a foundation of self-love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that I deserved a love as fierce and unyielding as I was. And that, I decided, as I raised a toast to the setting sun, was a story worth waiting for.